Okay everybody, hi, it's Tiger again. I'm going to be giving you the step-by-step tutorial for my fawn ears and antlers. For this, I'm using tissue paper, plaster wrap, masking tape, a headband, a heat tool, wire, and a glue gun. The plaster wrap I just got online for about $5. You can use that, or you can use air dry clay or paper mache. We're going to start by creating an antler shape with 3 pieces of sturdy aluminum wire. This wire, I got it from a dollar store in the floral section. It's very sturdy, but it's also very light, so it's perfect for this. I actually changed the shape of the larger piece of wire here, just because I didn't like how short what would have been the stub where it attaches to the band. I made it quite a bit longer so I could wrap it around the band. Here I'm just attaching the wires together with pieces of masking tape. And you can see that I've changed the shape of the other wire. I've also added tape to the tips of the antlers, and this is where I'm going to be wrapping it all up in tissue paper for some added bulk without adding the weight from the plaster wrap. It's a good idea that if you are using the plaster wrap or paper mache, to cover everything afterwards with a layer of masking tape just so it doesn't soak through and basically destroy the work you did of building up the bulk inside. I'm using gloves because I can't stand the feeling of powder on my fingers. You don't have to, it's just what I did. I'm using the plaster wrap in about 2-inch squares, and I have a bowl here of warm water. I find warm water works best because it makes the plaster dissolve a lot faster than in cold. When you're adding it to the antler, I find it best to use your fingertip to massage into the actual plaster bandage. This will smooth out the plaster, and if you don't do this, you'll end up with lots of little holes where the actual bandage weave is. Because what the plaster wrap is basically plaster of Paris on bandages. If you've ever gotten a cast on your arm or a leg, this is basically what the hospital uses for the cheaper casts. And here, this is me just using my fingertips to massage into the plaster. I use my heat tool, which I use for embossing. This is just to make everything dry faster, but if you don't have a rush, you can just let it dry overnight. With a glue gun, I'm adding the textures that you see at the base of deer and reindeer, moose, all those kind of animals. At the base of their antlers, there's lots of nubbins, basically, like dots of the antler material. And so what I'm doing is just adding dots and ribbons of glue with my glue gun. The reason I'm twirling it there is just so I don't have a thread. And I'm using beige for my base coat on my antler because my final piece for my costume is going to be in browns. So with a wet brush, the reason I'm using a wet brush for this is so that the paint actually gets into all the little cracks that came through if you didn't massage into the plaster enough. And then just with a sponge brush, I'm stippling with a dry sponge brush, in fact. I'm stippling with a darker brown. And for this, though, with the headband, I'm just going to add a dab of glue onto the headband itself, and then attach the antler with the wire going underneath, and then just bend the wire around the shape of the headband. The longer you leave the wire, obviously the more that you're going to have to wrap it, which will make the headband itself sturdier, but it'll also make the whole thing quite a bit heavier. I'm using just a pair of pliers here to tighten the wire so I don't stab myself in the head with it. Okay, and now I have actually made several brown and green roses with strips of torn up fabric, and I just thought they would add a nice decoration to the antlers. It'll also mostly hide the headband. Okay, so now we're moving on to the ears, and for this, the cheaper acrylic that you get, the better, because it brushes out a lot fluffier. And it has to be acrylic or it won't actually brush out. The actual knitting pattern for the ears will be available for my patrons on Patreon, and I'll just be adding a link below. And this will also have the pattern for a tail, which you make in the same way that you make the ears. I have just bent a wire around the frame of the ears to have it hold its shape and make it easier to attach to the headband. After tying some lengths of yarn around the frame, I'm just going to brush it out with a slicker brush, or you can use a comb. A slicker brush is basically the kind of brush that you use on a fluffy dog. You can get these from the dollar store. And yes, it does have to be acrylic yarn, because if you're using cotton, it will not brush out this way. It'll basically just tear up. But with acrylic, it gets nice and fluffy. And I find for some of the items I've made, it actually looks like real fur. And here I'm just using a different color. I'm using green and brown for my pattern. And then we're just going to bend the wires onto the headband and use the wires to actually create the ear shape. That's basically all there is to it. In another video, which I will either link into the description, or you can just go onto my channel, you'll find a step-by-step tutorial on how I made the actual face makeup to go with this. The longest part was actually using the crochet hook to attach the fur.